Well, after Professor Caroline Tisdall and Evan Williams, I'm even getting battered by the Tipstar contestants this morning. But fair play, the might bite thing didn't really work out. I'm very pleased to say that I'm rejoined here in the Luck on Sunday studio by a man who was here first in January 2019 when he suggested to me that his memoirs might make quite a nice book. Well, the book has finally arrived thanks to lockdown. Here it is, Pressing My Luck, Memoirs of a Fleet Street Veteran by Colin Mackenzie, formerly of the Daily Mail, and the infancy of the Racing Post, which features quite heavily in this book as well. I just said just in time for Christmas, but lockdown's granted you a nice gift, Colin.
It has. I mean, I was looking forward to the Olympics, I was looking forward to the Euros, I was looking forward to Aintree. And all that was denied me, and out of sheer boredom I thought I'd better sit down and try and get 100,000 words out. And amazingly, in exactly the 12 weeks of the original lockdown between March and June, I managed it.
And of course, in your journalistic career, you were always being told, you've only got this much to write, you've only got this many pages, you've only got this. Then you've actually got to fill 100,000. How different a discipline was it? Oh,
it's quite different, and it's extraordinary trying to look back at your career and remember what went on, because rather like I think will be recognised by many people of my age, you can remember things that happened in the 60s rather better than the things you can remember in the noughties. And my early career on the old Daily Express came back to me just like that. But looking up and checking on horse racing results and interviews I'd done in the 2000s was much harder.
Well, we talk quite a bit about Ronnie Biggs and your part in tracking down the great train robber in South America when you were last here. What I hadn't quite realised was how instrumental you were in the early days of the Racing Post, and what an enjoyable period that must have been for everyone who was involved with it.
Oh, it was thrilling. Brough Scott rang me when I was on the Daily Mail and said, would I like to come and be on the new paper, which was launching originally on about 1st of January 1986. And I had always wanted to be writing about racing. It had been my hobby ever since I was misled by a great friend of mine at Oxford and given a betting slip, and he wrote out 4 horses for me. He said, give me £2, 15 shillings. I said, what for? He said, that's a 5-bob Yankee. And of course, luck would have it, they all won, and I was hooked for life. So when Brough rang up in 1985, I absolutely grabbed it with both hands. I'd been quite friendly with Peter O'Sullivan and Clive Graham on the Express and other great racing correspondents, and they had a job for life. There was very little prospect of a 22-year-old ever getting into that role, and so I did lots of other things prior to the invitation from Brough. And starting up a new newspaper was absolutely thrilling. I mean, the first worry was, would it survive? And he assured me that Sheikh Mohammed, who was backing the project, had limitless funds. And so I decided I would take the chance.
And it was a chance well taken, because then you moved on to the Daily Mail. But one of the extracts I was most interested in was that you started a diary on the Racing Post, which had a sort of limited lifespan, because you realised how delicate the egos and senses of humour were of people in horse racing.
Well, that's true. Actually, the diary was 3 times a week initially, which was quite a lot to fill. Quite a lot to fill on a whole page. And gradually, over the first year, it got reduced to once a week, and by which time I had become the news editor of the paper. There was a bit of a shake-up after less than a year, because things hadn't gone quite as planned. And sadly, Graham Rock, the founding editor, was sacked. And Michael Harris, who'd been been the editor of Pacemaker, was brought in, and a slightly gentler tone was adopted and slightly new design. It was considered too tabloidy by the racing public, who were very used to the format of the Sporting Life, rather like the form lines of the Sporting Life, and didn't really like this brash new paper. So we had a complete makeover. But you're right, the diary column was upsetting too many people to last 3 days a week, that was for certain.
Do you think you could do that now? Do you think you could get a good diary back in a racing paper?
It's doubtful. There's too small a population, and you're bound to upset people. And egos are very sensitive in the racing world. I mean, I will tell one story. Michael Dickinson had just started up training at Manton, and This was a big move from the great national hunt trainer he'd become. And he decided for some unknown reason to adopt a rather 19th century approach to the lads. And he wanted them to drink in the pub that's actually on the Manton estate and refused them permission to go into Marlborough. Well, this was sort of echoes of wonderful conspiracies going back into the 19th century. And written by my good friend Paul Mathieu, if you've ever
he's
read those
been on
books.
the show, yeah.
Fabulous. Anyway, so I said that Manton was becoming Stalag Manton, and he had a massive sense of humour failure and banned the Racing Post from coming down and doing interviews there. So that was the first signs that maybe people lacked something of a sense of humour.
And then moving on to the Daily Mail latterly, I sensed your frustration coming through as to how you were getting a little bit sort of squeezed for space toward the back end of your career. Do you think with a potentially a growing interest in the sport, more interest in the sport now on television, more people during lockdown betting on the sport, do you sense that there's any way that racing can increase its market share again, or do you think that's gone now?
I think, unfortunately, sports editors in general, not everyone, but sports editors in general are completely soccer-centric. And football is God, rugby some way down the line, golf, they all play golf, so they love golf. There are very few sports editors I can think of who actually like racing, and most of them would like to chuck all the cards out. Cards take up an enormous amount of space. I think there is too much racing, and this squeezes the amount the poor racing correspondent can get into the paper, because in the Mail, for example, you're probably going to get one page. If there are 5 race meetings, that means the amount of copy is negligible.
And looking at the front cover of this book, and you've got Biggs arrested as the main headline. It is the signature story of your career, locating Ronnie Biggs. How do you think your life would have been different if that hadn't happened?
I've no idea. You take stories as they come, obviously. If I'd never found out about Ronald Biggs, I'd have probably stayed on the Express. I had just completed a term in New York as we had 4 North American correspondents at the time. Lord Beaverbrook, who died in 1963, loved to have enormous numbers of reporters and photographers on his staff. It was a sort of signature of the Express in the 50s, 60s and 70s. The largest mid-market paper, broadsheet of course, and he just loved having that. And I'd have probably stayed in New York. Maybe my wife and children would have come out and joined me, and that did happen to other colleagues of mine. So it's impossible to know. But I was very lucky during my career. I attracted quite a lot of big stories, not just the Ronnie Biggs story. And somehow, you can call it luck or you can call it skill, I would have found my niche somewhere. Whether I'd have ever become a racing correspondent is open to doubt.
Why do you think you were good at what you did? What was it that made you a good journalist?
Well, it's hardly for me to say. I really don't know. Mr. Yates, who's just occupied this chair, might say he was rubbish. All I know. I was able to turn a smidgen of information into a good story. That's one thing I would credit myself with. I mean, I'll give you a tiny example. Somebody rang me the day before Cheltenham and told me that a certain Irish trainer had to go to the Customs and Excise and pay an enormous £500,000 VAT bill. Otherwise, he wasn't going to be able to run his horse, Destriero, the following day. And so Mr. Noel Furlong paid £500,000 to be present to watch Destriero run in the Supreme Novices Hurdle. And if you hadn't backed it before then, you were silly, because it was a certainty, according to him.
Yeah, and so it proved, and he absolutely bolted up and beat a pretty good field. I think Granville again was second or third. Yeah.
Yes.
It was a very good race and a very good win.
Interestingly, he only ever won one more race in his entire career, Destriero.
Gamble well landed.
Well landed on that day, yes.
And so, where can we find Pressing My Luck? All good bookstores, etc.?
No, unfortunately, I've gone down the Amazon route. I say unfortunately. I have written a couple of other books which were published in the traditional way. These days, the book went to a couple of agents and a couple of publishers this summer, and they all said, well, we love it. It's full of magnificent stories, but we don't think it's commercial. And publishers are having a very, very hard time. I mean, Brough, Scott, bless him, wanted to publish it through Racing Post Books, and they've had to merge with another company there because of lack of resources. So in the end, I went down the Amazon route, found a New Zealand lady publisher who has published 200 books with Amazon. She edited it, and considering she knew nothing about racing, she did a pretty good job, I think. And it is available on Amazon, $9.99, $5.99 on Kindle.
Oh, perfect. Perfect. Well, all the best with it. And before you go, Colin, Lord Lucan.
Right. Well, I did, I think, promise you 2 years ago.
You did. I hadn't forgotten.
Have you read the Lucan stuff?
So where are we now with Lucan?
Well, I suspect he is now dead, but I do describe how I went down to South Africa, spent 4 weeks trying to find Lord Lucan. I had a very good tip-off, which is described in the book, albeit an unwilling tip-off from somebody rather connected with his associates and friends. I even went to, what's the place is now called Maputo, but it was called Lorenzo Marques in those days, which was capital of Mozambique, where he was a regular every 3 or 4 months at a particular bar, having collected money from a bank around the corner. And I showed his picture to the barman. He said, "Isso é o homem," which is, "This is the man," in Portuguese, my very bad Portuguese. And I never found him. Unlike Mr. Biggs, he wasn't willing to be found. But the idea that he fell on his sword 2 days after allegedly murdering the nanny of his children, I believe to be still rubbish, and so does Scotland Yard.
And you can read more about that in this book, Pressing My Luck by Colin Mackenzie, memoir of a Fleet Street veteran. Colin, thank you very much.
Thank you, Nick.
I wasn't going to forget Lucan, don't worry about that. Subscribe to Racing TV to be notified when more Luck on Sunday videos are appearing online. And don't forget to join me for the show every Sunday morning from 9 o'clock with the best guests.